Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for spending some time in my office with me. We discussed the humanitarian plight in Yemen in my office, and I wanted to follow up on the record with a question or two. As I noted to you in my recent trip with Senator Romney to the region, all of the partners that work with you in Sana'a flew into Amman, Jordan to meet with our delegation to give us some devastating news. And that news was that there are 250,000 Yemenis who are so sick and so malnourished that they are beyond saving. 250,000 Yemenis are likely to die in the coming months because of the famine and the spread of disease that exists both in Houthi-controlled territories and in coalition-controlled territories. We have been a major humanitarian partner in the efforts to save these lives, notwithstanding the conflict, $720 million in assistance over the last 2 years coming from the U.S. Treasury. But this FY 2020 request specifies only $41 million in total bilateral aid to Yemen. Help me understand that number and whether I'm reading the budget request wrong. Are we going to see a diminution in our humanitarian assistance to Yemen in the coming year?
Senator, I don't have the precise budget figure on Yemen, but let me say this. We'll not walk away from our humanitarian role there. Again, as you know, as you rightly pointed, $721 million in humanitarian assistance in Yemen, $692 million of that comes from USAID. We continue to work closely with all the NGOs that are working there. I met yesterday with Carolyn Miles from Save the Children, and yet today, at the end of the day, I'll be meeting, as I do regularly, with all the international NGOs that are working in Yemen. And a few days ago, I spoke with the World Food Program by phone, just on another assessment there. All of the dark things that you have characterized there are true. I mean, this is a humanitarian catastrophe, and in some cases, the level of suffering is not irreversible, or is not reversible. It's not something that we can immediately turn back on, and it will have long-term consequences that are dark and sad. We won't walk away from our humanitarian role.
And you had testified in the House that the conflict itself was what's blocking humanitarian assistance. I would tend to agree, and our humanitarian partners tend to agree, but I would just reinforce what we discussed in private, which is that notwithstanding the settlement of the conflict, there are steps that both sides can take in order to improve the situation for Yemenis on the ground. I will say, though, that we are only party to one side of the conflict, and so we have much more impact over the side of the conflict of which we are a member, and there are certainly steps that our partners can take to release money into the economy, to free up the bureaucratic hurdles that still exist to this day on humanitarian assistance getting into the Red Sea ports. We can take steps, even notwithstanding the political process, to ease the flow of humanitarian aid into that country, correct?
Senator, yes. So first off, as a point of clarification, the $41 million, just had a note given to me, is it's the development assistance part of our request. It does not reflect the humanitarian assistance that we will naturally provide. But secondly, you are correct in that both sides have steps to take. That is absolutely true. Part of the reason that we meet with Deputy Secretary of State John Sullivan and I regularly with representatives of all the key international NGOs and UN family is, quite frankly, is to learn about those impediments that weaken the effectiveness and raise the costs. And then what we try to do, and the state obviously takes the diplomatic lead here, is to push those to ease the burdens in delivering assistance.
Mr. Chairman, I had question that I wanted to ask about the impact of the cuts to the Palestinian Authority that is probably too complicated for the time that I have remaining, so I'll make it for the record. I'll just use my final 20 seconds to note that on this trip, Senator Romney and I also visited Iraq, and there is a great fear in Iraq that the failure to resettle displaced populations and to rebuild the portions of the country that were destroyed in our fight along with the Iraqi army and militias to root out ISIS will be, in fact, the ultimate invitation for these Sunni extremist groups to reemerge. And there are rumors that we are going to cut our humanitarian assistance and development assistance into the country. It still represents only about 20% of our total spend there, which seems to me to be an unthoughtful apportionment of dollars. But I will just state the imperative of continuing and increasing our development and reconstruction assistance to Iraq. If we do not make that commitment, if we do not signal our long-term commitment to that funding, it will provide an impetus for an already strengthening ISIS inside Iraq to make the case to Sunni populations that it is its only protector. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.